My name is Marion Hollister. I'm 67 years old. I've lived on Bennett Street for almost 40 years, long enough to know the rhythm of its mornings, the quiet hum of lawn sprinklers, the smell of coffee drifting through screen doors, the slow roll of sunlight over Charleston's painted porches. That morning began like any other, except for the weight in my chest. Daniel had been gone for 6 months, and today was the first time his name would be read aloud inside a lawyer's office instead of across our breakfast table. I'd laid out the blue linen dress he always liked, pressed the collar flat, and told myself to breathe. By 8:30, the air was already thick with heat. I locked the front door, slipped the folder of legal papers into my purse, and walked down the steps to the old silver sedan Daniel used to drive. The smell of magnolia hung heavy in the air. Everything felt too calm, too still. I sat behind the wheel, adjusted the mirror, and turned the key halfway. The engine made its familiar click. Then I heard it a man's voice, hoarse and urgent. "Marion, wait, stop." He'd seen something near the car last night and couldn't shake it. Mr. Larkin, my next-door neighbor, was running toward me from his yard, bareheaded, still in his work shirt. His face had gone as pale as salt. "What on earth?" He slammed a hand against the hood. "Don't touch anything. Step out." Right now, I froze, confused but obeyed. My shoes scraped against the gravel as I stepped back. Mr. Larkin was breathing hard, his chest rising beneath the faded fabric. "I saw someone near your car last night," he said. "Thought it was odd, your daughter-in-law and a man near your car. It looked odd, couldn't tell what they were doing." The words didn't make sense. "Alicia, my son's wife." I managed a faint, "You must be mistaken." He shook his head and lifted the hood carefully. A metallic creak broke the silence. The smell hit us first sharp. Chemical. Wrong. A small plastic bag was wedged near the engine, slick with clear liquid. One of the ignition wires hung severed, its copper ends glinting in the sun. Mr. Larkin swore under his breath and stepped back. "If you'd turned that key..." I couldn't move. The world narrowed to the sound of cicadas and the blood rushing in my ears. My hand went to my mouth. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then he closed the hood gently and said, "Let's call someone who knows what they're looking at." I nodded, still trembling. The keys were cold in my palm as I stared at the car that had almost become my coffin. The folder for the lawyer's meeting lay on the passenger seat, waiting. I couldn't stop staring at the car. The morning light hit the chrome in small, cruel flashes, as if mocking me for trusting something so ordinary. Mr. Larkin stood beside me, rubbing the back of his neck. "I should have said something last night," he muttered, "but it was late, and I wasn't sure what I saw." "What did you see?" My voice sounded too calm, even to me. He hesitated. "Add a brief reference. Your daughter-in-law. Alicia, about my son's age, was out here around 11, with a man in a dark suit. They had the hood open. I thought maybe Evan asked them to move the car or something. Guess I was wrong." The name hit me like cold water. Alicia. Always polished. Always smiling. The kind of woman who never forgot to bring wine to dinner or hug me in front of others. As if affection were a performance. I tried to picture her crouched beside my car with a stranger, and my stomach turned. "Did you see what they did?" I asked. Mr. Larkin shook his head. "Just shadows moving." I thought I heard something metallic. I didn't want to pry. I pressed a hand to my chest, willing my heart to slow. Every instinct screamed to call the police, but then I thought of the folder waiting on the passenger seat, the will reading, the lawyer, the day Daniel's voice would be spoken again. Even if only through papers. Going now meant asserting my presence before Alicia could rewrite the narrative, the story to herself. "I'll handle it," I said quietly. He frowned. "Marion, you should let someone I will." After the meeting, he didn't like it, but he knew better than to argue. Mr. Larkin helped me close the hood and walked me back to the porch. his eyes still darting toward the car like it might come alive. Inside, I washed my trembling hands, changed into another dress, and looked at my reflection. The woman staring back at me looked older than she had yesterday, but her eyes were sharp now, awake in a way they hadn't been in months. I picked up my purse and left for the notary's office, the sound of Mr. Larkin's warning still echoing through the quiet Charleston street. Chapter 3. The Will Reading. The notary's office on East Bay Street smelled of paper, coffee, and something faintly metallic like old money and older secrets. I'd walked past that building 100 times with Daniel, never imagining I'd one day sit inside to hear how he'd divided the life we built together. Evan was already there when I arrived, pale and tight around the mouth. "Mom," he said, rising quickly to hug me. His voice was gentle, uncertain. Alicia stood beside him, every inch composed. Her cream blouse gleamed under the window light. Her smile was soft, practiced. "Marion," she murmured, touching my arm. "I know how painful today must be." Her perfume lingered like a warning. I nodded and sat down, folding my hands in my lap to keep them from trembling. Mr. Carpenter, Daniel's lawyer, entered carrying a thick folder. "Mrs. Hollister," he greeted with professional warmth. "We'll make this brief." He read through the legal language, his drawl steady, unfeeling. I listened with half an ear until I caught the words that hollowed out the air. "The business accounts are transferred to Alicia Hartman Hollister, as Daniel requested to protect the company's continuity." My breath caught. Evan looked stunned, his lips parting in disbelief. Alicia didn't move, just smiled, faintly, like she'd known all along. Mr. Carpenter continued. "The family residence remains with Mrs. Marion Hollister, as well as a personal account." His voice seemed to come from somewhere far away. I saw Daniel's signature, bold and final, at the bottom of the page. When it was over, chairs scraped and papers shuffled. Alicia came to me, sympathy dripping from her tone. "Daniel wanted me to keep the business running for Evan, for the family. I hope you understand." I stared at the diamond flashing on her hand. "I'm sure he thought you were capable," I said quietly. Her smile sharpened. "Just for a second." He did. Evan reached for her, uncertain, already pulled into her orbit. I turned toward the door. The air outside hit me hard, thick, hot, alive with the smell of the harbor. As they walked ahead, arm in arm, the sunlight swallowed them. I stood on the sidewalk, clutching the folder to my chest. The ink still fresh, the betrayal already old. The heat outside the notary's office clung to my skin like a second layer. I stood on the steps, trying to steady my breath. Daniel's name, his company, his signature, they still echoed in my head like a bell I couldn't silence. Alicia waited by the curb, sunlight glinting off her sunglasses. When she saw me, she approached with that polished grace that always looked rehearsed. "Marion," she said softly, laying a hand on my arm. "I know today was difficult. Daniel wanted me to keep things running for Evan's sake. It's what he would have wanted." Her voice was smooth, her face angelic. I'd seen that same expression at Daniel's funeral. A portrait of sympathy that never touched her eyes. "That's thoughtful of you," I replied. "I just didn't expect changes." She smiled faintly. "Daniel believed in preparing for the future. You know how he was." A warm gust swept between us, carrying the brine of the harbor. I folded my shaking hands before she noticed. "Mr. Larkin mentioned seeing you near my car last night, something small. Curious." That didn't quite fit. Her smile cracked just a flicker. Then recovery. "Oh, that must have been someone else. He gets confused sometimes." "Perhaps," I said quietly. "He does notice things others miss." Her eyes narrowed for half a heartbeat. Then, with a careful smile, she walked to her car and drove off. I stood there, the sun burning overhead, my calm mask unbroken, but my certainty now sharp as glass. The next morning, I went to the farmer's market on Rutledge Avenue, more out of habit than need. The smell of peaches and damp earth hung in the air. The chatter of vendors a familiar hum that usually calmed me. But today, every voice seemed too sharp, every glance too long. I bought tomatoes from Mrs. Porter, who'd lived down the street since before Evan was born. Her smile faltered when she saw me. "Morning, Marion," she said, bagging the produce a little too quickly. "Hot day, isn't it?" "It is," I answered, pretending not to notice the way her eyes flicked to the woman beside her. They whispered something low, and I caught one word: Daniel. I moved to the next stall, forcing my breath steady. The air felt heavier, like the humidity had turned into judgment. Near the flower stand, two younger women were talking over a bouquet of lilies. "They say he didn't just go," one said softly. "The doctors couldn't explain it. And your daughter-in-law, she was always present, wasn't she?" The other nodded, her voice a murmur. "Poor Mrs. Hollister. Some people have no luck." I kept walking. My basket clutched so tightly the handle bit into my palm. Every step sounded louder than it should. When I reached the end of the row, I stopped by the harbor fence, the wind carrying salt and whispers in equal measure. They pitied and feared me. They knew something was wrong, but gossip was safer than truth. I stood there until my eyes stung from the sun, then turned back toward home, the market noise fading behind me. For the first time since Daniel's death, I no longer felt grief. I felt anger, quiet, steady, and alive. And that night, the house felt hollow, every clock tick too loud, every shadow too still. I walked into Daniel's study without thinking, drawn by something heavier than curiosity. The air smelled of cedar and old paper, like the room had been waiting for me. His desk was just as he'd left it, stacks of folders perfectly aligned, pens in their holder, order masking whatever chaos lay beneath. I ran my fingers along the wood, remembering the last night I saw him here, laughing, promising he'd be done in 5 minutes. That was 2 weeks before the heart attack that no longer felt like one. The drawers opened easily until the last one, the bottom right, stopped. Locked. Daniel had never locked anything from me. I hesitated, then reached for the tiny brass key he sometimes kept tucked in a corner of his desk dictionary. Surprisingly, it fit. Inside lay a single manila envelope marked with Alicia's name. My pulse jumped as I opened it. Bank statements, dozens, showing transfers between accounts I didn't recognize. Each signed by Daniel and Alicia, the dates aligned with his illness. Each transaction more suspicious than the last. I was still staring when the phone rang. "Mrs. Hollister." The voice was low, hesitant. "This is Dr. Hayes from Charleston General. I treated your husband." My breath caught. "Yes, doctor." There were irregularities in his toxicology report levels that didn't make sense. It was never investigated. The folder trembled in my hands. "I think you should come in tomorrow," he said softly. "There's something you need to see." The line went dead. I looked at Daniel's handwriting one last time and realized the truth had been locked here all along, waiting for me to find it. By morning, the fear had turned into purpose. I called Carter as soon as the sun came up. He had been Daniel's mechanic for over 20 years, a quiet man with oil-stained hands and an honesty that didn't need words. He arrived an hour later in his old blue pickup, the same one he'd driven since before Evan was born. When he saw my face, he didn't ask questions, just went straight to the garage. "Let's take a look," he said, voice low and steady. The moment he lifted the hood, I saw his expression change. His brows pulled together, his jaw tightened. He leaned closer, tracing a cut wire with his finger, then glanced back at me. "Who touched this car?" I swallowed hard. "Alicia. Last night. My neighbor saw her." He muttered a curse under his breath and reached for a flashlight. This wasn't wear and tear. Someone sliced the ignition wire clean, then tampered with the fuel line. My stomach turned. You mean, he straightened, meeting my eyes. If you'd turned that key, the heat from the ignition would have set it off. You wouldn't have made it to the end of the driveway. The air left my lungs in a shudder. He took out his phone and began snapping pictures each angle, each cut, each trace of sabotage. You'll need this, he said. If the police get involved or if someone tries to deny it later. I nodded, unable to speak. He handed me his phone, letting me send the photos to mine. When he looked at me again, there was something almost fatherly in his eyes. Whoever did this wanted you gone, Marion. But you're still here. That counts for something. I pressed my lips together and whispered, not for long, not until she's caught. The cafe across from the hospital smelled of burnt espresso and rain-soaked pavement. I arrived 10 minutes early, clutching the folder of bank statements against my chest like armor. Through the window, I could see the white building where Daniel had taken his last breath for the first time. I didn't look away. Dr. Hayes entered right on time, mid-50s. Tired eyes, the look of a man who carried too many secrets. He spotted me and gave a cautious nod before sitting down. Mrs. Hollister, he began, his tone formal but kind. I wasn't sure you'd come. I've been waiting for someone to tell me the truth. I said. Everyone else has been content with silence. He took off his glasses, rubbed the bridge of his nose. Then you deserve to hear it. Your husband's tests came back with dangerously elevated potassium levels, enough to trigger cardiac arrest in someone perfectly healthy. My throat tightened. You're saying someone poisoned him? I can't say that, he replied quietly. But the results weren't natural. We wanted to run an autopsy, but your daughter-in-law intervened, claiming it would violate family dignity. The consent for cremation was signed before a legal objection could be formally submitted. The words hit harder than any blow. Alicia's handwriting neat. Precise flashed through my mind. Signing her name where mine should have been, Dr. Hayes continued, his voice low. I've seen accidents, heart failure, drug reactions, but not like this. Someone knew what they were doing. I tried to raise concerns, but the hospital closed the file. Outside, sirens wailed faintly in the distance. Inside, the world seemed to stop. Why tell me now, I whispered. Because I couldn't sleep knowing the truth. Died with him, he said. And because you deserve a chance to seek justice. He slid a copy of the lab report across the table. The lines blurred as my eyes filled. I left the cafe without finishing my coffee, the folder heavier in my hands. The grief I carried no longer felt like mourning. It felt like fire. And for the first time since Daniel's death, I knew exactly what to do with it. The night of the dinner felt like a performance I'd rehearsed for months. The table was set with my mother's china, the silver polished to a mirror's shine. Candles flickered over the crystal glasses, soft light masking the storm underneath. The cameras were hidden, one behind the clock, another beneath the mantel, and a third in the hallway mirror, all connected, all recording. Raphael, the private investigator, had checked everything twice before leaving. She'll talk, he'd said. People like her always do when they think they've won. At 7:58, headlights swept across the driveway. Evan came in first, carrying a bottle of wine, his face tight with forced optimism. Alicia followed. Elegant in black, her perfume sharp and cold. Mother, she said smoothly, placing the wine on the table. I'm glad we can finally do this like a family. I smiled faintly. That's all I've wanted, dear. Peace. Dinner began in silence, forks against porcelain. The faint hum of cicadas through the open window. Evan tried small talk about work, but his voice trembled. Alicia kept her gaze on me, measuring, cautious. When dessert came, I poured coffee and said softly, Dr. Hayes called me yesterday. Alicia's hand froze around her spoon. Oh, he showed me Daniel's blood results. Potassium levels off the charts. Strange thing, isn't it? You stopped the autopsy. Her smile faltered. To spare you pain. Marion. You were barely standing. And the car, I continued. Carter says it would have exploded. The same morning as the will reading. Lucky, isn't it? Evan looked between us, confused. Mom, what are you talking about? Alicia stood abruptly, the mask slipping. She's delusional. You've been feeding her nonsense. I stayed seated, calm. Then why did you sign Daniel's bank transfers or visit my garage at midnight? Her face twisted, rage breaking through the polish. You were supposed to die, she screamed, her voice raw. You were never meant to walk out of that house. Evan gasped. Alicia? What are you saying? She reached for her purse, hand shaking, and pulled out a small kitchen knife. The candles flickered with her movement. You ruined everything I didn't move. Outside. Headlights flashed. The front door burst open. Police dropped the weapon. Alicia froze. 2 officers rushed in, tackling her to the floor. The knife clattered across the tile. Evan stood in shock as they cuffed her, reading her rights over her sobs. When the house fell silent again, Raphael appeared in the doorway, recording still running. I exhaled for the first time that night. Evan sank into a chair, pale, shaking. I reached for his hand, steady as stone. The sound of the cuffs closing was the loudest peace I had ever known. Weeks passed before the noise faded. Court dates, statements, hearings, each one felt like reopening the same wound. Alicia and her accomplice were sentenced to prison. The forged documents, the transfers, the recordings all laid bare in front of strangers. When the verdict came, I didn't feel triumph, only quiet exhaustion. Evan came to visit one Sunday evening. He looked smaller somehow, humbled, his eyes red from too many sleepless nights. He stood on the porch, holding lilies, Daniel's favorite. Mom, he said softly, I don't know how to make this right. You already are, I whispered. We sat together as the sun sank over Bennett Street, the air thick with magnolia and memory. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The city hummed beyond the trees. Ordinary again. When he left, I lingered on the porch. The same porch light Daniel had installed decades ago, now slightly rusted at the base, still worked. A little rust around the base, but it worked. I reached up, turned it on, and the glow spilled gently across the steps. This light isn't for waiting anymore, I murmured. It's for peace. The street was quiet, the air still, and for the first time since Daniel's death, I finally felt safe.